Hello, everyone. She was not just Argentina's first supermodel, she was Argentina's revolution. Blonde, elegant, and bilingual. Valeria Mazza entered fashion in the 1990s like a quiet storm. She was not the loudest, not the boldest, but she was impossible to ignore. The first Latin American woman to appear on the cover of Sports Illustrated, the face of Versace, Armani, and Valentino. A muse shaped by Latin warmth and European discipline. But behind that polished exterior was a woman, fighting to be seen as more than a symbol. She was not discovered in New York or Paris. She rose from Rosario, from school books into strict Catholic upbringing, into the lights of Milan, with ambition too big for the world that tried to limit her. Valeria was not here to be decoration. She was here to last, and more than that, to lead. But what did it cost a woman like her breaking through in an industry not built for Latina power? Valeria Mazza was born in 1972 in Rosario, Argentina, a city known more for football legends than fashion icons. She grew up in a modest middle-class home, raised with discipline, humility, and the quiet pride of a conservative Catholic family. Her parents were not artists or entertainers. Her mother was a homemaker, and her father, a traveling salesman. They valued education, order, and hard work, beauty in their world was not a currency. It was an accident. From a young age, Valeria stood out. She was tall, graceful, with piercing blue eyes and sunlit hair that set her apart from her classmates. But in Argentina, especially in the 1980s, modeling was not seen as a respectable path, especially not for a girl raised to become a teacher, a wife, or a dignified professional. Valeria was sensitive and observant. She enjoyed school. She had dreams of studying speech therapy. Her elegance was not studied. It was natural the way she moved, the way she listened, the way she carried silence like it had weight. At 14, she was discovered during a local fashion show in Paraná, a small town far removed from Milan or Paris. A scout noticed her poise and pulled her aside. The suggestion was simple. She could be something more. But the idea of modeling was met with hesitation. Her mother was protective, her family unsure. This was not a path they had envisioned. But Valeria was patient. She did not rush. She balanced her studies with her early photo shoots. She treated modeling not as escape, but as exploration, a way to see the world without abandoning her values. By the time she turned 16, the camera no longer just liked her. It followed her. She began to appear in local magazines, walk in Argentine fashion weeks, and gather attention far beyond her region. But she was still grounded. Still the girl who helped her mother clean the house before castings. Still the teenager who prayed before big decisions. There was no arrogance, only curiosity. And beneath that polished image was a quiet fire, a drive not to be famous, but to be great. What the world would soon discover was that Valeria Mazza was not just another pretty girl. She was a young woman who knew who she was and, more importantly, who she refused to become. The moment that changed everything was not loud. It came quietly, wrapped in professionalism and timing. At 17, Valeria Mazza was invited to walk in a European fashion show. She had been working steadily in Argentina, gaining traction, appearing in local campaigns and catwalks. But the invitation to cross continents, to leave behind the familiar rhythms of South America for the sleek tempo of Europe, was different. It felt bigger, riskier, and yet inevitable. Her parents hesitated. They had raised her to pursue stability, not fame. A modeling career in Europe sounded more like fantasy than future. But Valeria was clear, calm, respectful. She asked for one chance, one trip. If it did not work, she would come home and return to her studies. She boarded that flight not as a wide-eyed girl chasing dreams, but as a young woman testing her own worth against the standards of Milan and Paris. What followed was not a fairy tale, but a quiet, strategic climb. She did not explode onto the scene. She entered the rooms, absorbed everything, and waited. Observed how the other models moved, how photographers spoke, how designers chose. She listened more than she spoke, watched more than she posed. And when her moment came, she was ready. One of her early breakthroughs was working with Gianni Versace, a designer who did not just look for beauty, but presence. He saw something in Valeria that others had missed, a poise beyond her years, a confidence that was neither loud nor insecure. She became a fixture in Versace's shows, appearing in campaigns that circulated worldwide. Then came Giorgio Armani, Valentino, Carolina Herrera. In rapid succession, she became a preferred face not because she demanded attention, but because she made elegance feel effortless. The industry began to whisper her name, and in 1996, her image appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated's swimsuit issue. Next to Tyra Banks, a historic pairing that made headlines across the globe. She was the first Latin American model to reach that level of visibility. Suddenly, Valeria was everywhere. New York, Paris, and Madrid, Tokyo. Her Argentine accent, once a curiosity, became a charm. She had done what few from her continent had ever managed, not just to enter the global stage, but to stand firmly in its center. But through it all, she kept her rhythm. She avoided the party scene. She declined work that compromised her values. She stayed close to her family. She remained grounded, not by accident, but by discipline. In an industry that rewarded spectacle, Valeria Mazza rose with grace. And she did it on her own terms. By the late 1990s, Valeria Mazza was no longer just a Latin American success story, she was an international institution. Her face became synonymous with high fashion. Her name featured alongside the most iconic of her time. She was not the loudest supermodel, but she was among the most respected. Valeria had something others could not imitate, the ability to move seamlessly between worlds. She could walk for Versace in Milan and host a UNICEF gala in Argentina the next day. She was fluent in fashion, fluent in diplomacy, fluent in discipline. That rare blend of European elegance and Latin spirit made her impossible to categorize and impossible to replace. Her golden era was not defined by a single campaign, but by her constant presence. Vogue, Elle, Glamour, Valentino, Armani, Chanel. She became the muse of both old-world couture and modern power brands. She was one of the few Latina models to be invited into elite fashion circles, not as a novelty, but as a pillar. She worked constantly, but never looked exhausted. She was everywhere, yet never overexposed. Because Valeria did not chase fame, she managed it carefully, quietly. Her beauty never screamed. It held its ground with grace. Even at the peak of her fame, she continued her university studies in speech therapy. She refused to let fashion become her only identity. That balance gave her power, and it showed. While other models crumbled under pressure, Valeria remained serene, not because it was easy, but because she had prepared for this. She used her platform to elevate Latin American fashion, to bridge continents, to represent something bigger than herself. She was not trying to escape her roots. She carried them in every room she entered, and people noticed. When the 2000s arrived and the era of supermodels began to shift, Valeria Mazza did not vanish. She transitioned gracefully. She began producing shows, launching brands, hosting events. Her name became more than a face. It became a business, a legacy. But even as she conquered the industry, one truth remained constant. Valeria never chased the spotlight. She simply stood still and let the light find her. In a world obsessed with reinvention, Valeria Mazza dared to stay the same. While the fashion industry evolved through edgier trends, louder personas, and more provocative images, She held her ground, elegant, intelligent, conservative. She did not follow the chaos, she followed her compass. What made her different was not rebellion in the typical sense. She did not shave her head or shock with statements. Her defiance was quiet. She chose to marry young, build a family in the midst of her fame, and reject the idea that a woman had to choose between motherhood and ambition. At a time when being a supermodel meant being everywhere, unattached and unrooted, Valeria chose stability. She married businessman Alejandro Gravier in 1998 and soon became a mother of four. The industry was skeptical. There were whispers that she would disappear, that family would slow her down, that her image too wholesome, too structured would fade in the era of fashion anarchy. But Valeria proved them wrong. She became more than a face. She became a brand one, built on values. She showed up to events pregnant. She took her children on set. She refused campaigns that sexualized her in ways she found disrespectful. She was never ashamed of her Catholic faith, never hid her opinions, even when they were unpopular in artistic circles. She understood that real power is not about pleasing everyone. It is about living in alignment, and that scared people more than any rebellion ever could. She maintained control over her image. She curated it, protected it, expanded it into business and philanthropy and cultural representation. In a space where many models were told what to wear, what to weigh, how to smile, Valeria always knew what to refuse. She once said in an interview, "My values are not a weakness. They are the reason I last." And that was her difference. She did not bend to the industry's chaos. She reshaped her place inside it. Her resistance was not loud, it was composed, but it changed the model of what a model could be. For someone so controlled, so composed, Valeria Mazza's fall, if it could be called that, was not a collapse. It was a slow withdrawal, a step away from the frenzy, not because she was irrelevant, but because the world around her was changing faster than she cared to chase. By the late 2000s, fashion had embraced chaos. The supermodel era was fading, Instagram stars, reality TV personalities, and a new digital aesthetic began to dominate. Valeria, with her poise and formality, suddenly felt out of step with the spectacle. She was not dramatic enough, not provocative enough, not desperate enough to stay center stage at all costs. But the true challenge came from the weight of maintaining perfection in public, in marriage, in motherhood, in image. Whispers about her husband's business dealings began to surface. Rumors of financial mismanagement, criticism over tax evasion claims. Her name was dragged into headlines she never sought. She remained silent, dignified, but the pressure was undeniable. She had built a life based on values, and now those values were being questioned not for what she did, but for what she was connected to. The Argentine press, once enamored, became intrusive. Her role as a public figure, a fashion icon, a mother, a businesswoman, all began to blur. She stepped back from fashion weeks, declined interview, and focused on family. There were no public breakdowns, no scandals of infidelity or addiction. But the absence was noticeable. Her presence, once steady and elegant, became quieter, less visible. The industry moved on, but she never chased it back. Years passed. She returned, occasionally as a judge on television, as a guest in charity events, as a speaker for causes she believed in, but never again as the girl on the runway. That part of her was closed, not because it failed, but because it had served its purpose. In 2013, when asked about her distance from the industry, she said simply, "I chose peace." That sentence, so soft and resolute, said everything. Valeria Mazza did not disappear. She withdrew with intention, because she knew that the brightest spotlight could also be the most dangerous place to lose yourself. And she had no intention of becoming a ghost in her own life. She was never the loudest voice in fashion, but her silence carried weight. Valeria Mazza may not be trending on today's runways, but her imprint is in every Latin American model who dares to dream beyond borders, in every working mother who chooses both ambition and love, in every elegant woman who refuses to let the world rush her into reinvention. Her legacy is not measured in scandals or reinventions, but in longevity, in the way she turned fashion into a platform not for shock, but for consistency, not for rebellion, but for dignity. She stayed true when others shifted. She lasted when trends passed. Today, she walks with the calm of someone who has nothing left to prove. She lives with the rare grace of someone who chose when to step away before the world asked her to. She reminds us that in fashion, the most radical act is sometimes not to change, but to remain. And maybe that is the real question she leaves behind. In a world obsessed with reinvention, is there still space for elegance that endures?